No time, no tools, big expectations. How do you transform school culture without derailing the train? Answer: little wins that bring big changes. The Flywheel Effect. Harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.
Hello and welcome back to the Flywheel Effect. This is Jordan with Live School, and we've had a couple months off of the show, but we are back and we're going to make some changes to the show that I want to introduce to you guys before we jump into the episode today. The idea of the Flywheel Effect is it goes to, we were talking about school culture, implying that idea to school culture. We're talking about small wins or small changes that get momentum and eventually make big time results. So those results, that good culture happens on its own. And the idea with the show has a lot of times has been to have interviews where we have, school leaders on and they tell you how they accomplish that. They tell their story. And our interviews go, 30, 45 to an hour. And we've been great. We've had really good guests, but I'm talking to school leaders, and this spring, we spent a lot of time traveling to campuses all across the country. I've been in Jacksonville, Florida, Nashville, Tennessee, Austin, Texas, and Las Vegas, Nevada, all in the past month or so. And and as myself, I was a science teacher. I was a dean of students. And I coached baseball and football for a long time. One thing that really is evident to me, and I think it's going to resonate a lot with our audience, the folks that listen to this show, is you guys don't have any time. You really don't. And I think that if you're going to tune into this show, I want it to be valuable for you as soon as you tune in. So we're going to get to the point. We're going to get to it very fast. And our episode is going to be much, much shorter. And we're going to dive into topics. And we're going to try to give you insights you can use in your school immediately. Even if it's just in the planning process or using it in the classroom, or you're trying to use it at the admin level or maybe even the district level. We want to give you insights, stories, and deep dive and explanations and things that you can use right away. So I really want you to think about this show as going forward as professional development. And when you go to professional development, you need to walk away from that with something you can use. And that's the goal here. We want this to be the best professional development you can find. And we're going to deliver to you in podcast form. And we're going to try to keep our length of episodes down to 10 to 15 minutes or so. So you can get your information you need, hopefully, when the time you have your commute and you have your morning coffee to and from school. So without further ado, we're going to jump into our first episode just like that. And we're going to talk about PBIS. Specifically, we're going to talk about the tiers of PBIS and why you should have those tiers. This goes really great with an accompanying episode we're going to release that is an interview with Ms. Kathy Emerson talking about MTSS. So if you want to hear more about Tier 2 and 3, check out that episode. This was really going to talk about Tier 1 and how you sell PBIS to your staff and why it's important that they understand that there are tiers to this program. So without further ado, let's talk about PBIS. For those not familiar, it's positive behavior intervention and supports, and the idea behind it is you're going to shift your focus in your school from what you shouldn't do to what you should do. So we're trying to base everything around what we want to see more of in our kids in school, and that is a very subtle change. Now, that subtle change has a big impact. And when the impact we're talking about is reduced referrals and reduced discipline problems, which is in turn has reduced suspensions, both in school and out of school. And all that in turn leads to more class time for kids, higher engagement for your students. And all those things are positives that are going to be beneficial to your school and overall your school culture. That's why we encourage PBIS. That's why we like this. That's why we want to get better at it. Now, it's important to understand that it's a tiered system, and what we mean by that is think of a pyramid, and you have the base of the pyramid that let's call that base 80%, and the goal here is that 80% of your kiddos can be supported by everything that's at that base. Now, here's where a lot of schools kind of go wrong is they just, they focus on positive, but they don't really communicate that part to their staff that this is a tiered system. So you have this change from all these rules of what not to do, and you change these to these positive expectations. And everybody initially is on board. They say, that sounds great. Let's do that. And they, it's sold to them as this is going to improve behavior across the board. And what happens is it works really well initially. And then because it's really only meant that tier 1 system really only addresses your issues for 80%. And that's the goal that's the goal. That's how it's intended. You start seeing different adults in the building notice that you still have some kids that are acting out. And the reason they're acting out could be for a lot of reasons, but the whole idea is that your tier 2 and 3 structures, those supports, those are the things, those are the additional plans, the additional personnel, the additional structures that are needed to support, those kids should account for under 20%. And there's some very good reasons for 80 and 20% here. And think about it from an admin perspective. And this is all about how you define those percentages. And it's hard to think about it as grouping, but you sort of have to because you have resources you have to use. But think about it this way. If 80% of your kids get 0 or 1 discipline referrals, or the discipline infractions, however you define it, you can probably handle that from a admin team, counselor, social worker, behavior interventionist. You can divvy up those responsibilities, and you can have a well-run school, and they can get the structures and support they need to eventually not need those structures, hopefully. So, in some cases. But if, let's say, 50% of your kids in your building get more than 1 referral, now you're talking about exponentially more difficult situation, because all of your admin time is now taken up processing referrals, and it becomes kind of a cycle of you're always working on discipline. You don't work on anything else. That's one of the reasons, and not to mention that kids are not all the same. Some things work for some kids, some don't. Pretty much things that you could see in schools everywhere. And that's what we've seen from our travels and what I've seen from my experience. But let's talk about the tiers, and we'll focus the most of our time on tier 1 here, because tier 2 and tier 3, we can talk a little bit more in another episode, MTSS. So tier 1, we call that universal. It's for all students in all settings. We're talking about the expectations that you decide as a team. This is what you should do in classrooms. This is what we expect in classrooms, hallways, restrooms, cafeteria, auditoriums, all the places. This is also your signage, the things that all students see, and this, very visible. This is the communication that goes out to everyone. It's also the school-wide rewards, things that everyone is eligible for. Everything's working towards. If you're going to have expectations, you need incentives for following those expectations. This is also your social emotional skills lessons, things that you offer for all your kiddos. Your tier 1 team really needs to consist of a coach, somebody who can oversee it. And this doesn't have to be an admin. It could be a teacher. I did this as a teacher. You need an admin on the team, somebody that can. It could be your head principal, could be somebody else, somebody that can communicate between those two groups. And need teachers from all grade levels, and you need a parent. And here's the part that a lot of schools could improve on. You need student representation on that tier 1 team, so they can tell you, hey, these expectations, these are the things, we see what you're saying you expect of us. These are the things that we think that can help us be successful while we're here. We talked to Callie Daugherty at Word High School in West Virginia, and that's the thing. They took their behavior, their rubric for expectations. They handed it to students, and their students gave them suggestions and rewrote it. The same thing happened at Cato Hills, Arkansas, Cato Hills High School in Arkansas. And having students involved in that expectations process, that design and the rubric process was a big deal. We'll have another episode on rubrics specifically. But tier 1, we want all those things, and that's going to pretty much handle behavior school-wide for 80% of your kiddos. And we want to sell that to our staff as 80% need to be addressed by tier 1 structures. Here's some things to do in classroom that can help you out with small infractions, and anything above that, admin team can help. We're shooting for this 80-20 split. So that way that most of the things were handled by these structures we set up to begin with. And the tier 2 and 3 stuff handles by admin team, the MTSS, and so forth. So that is the basic structures of PBIS, and we're talking about why it's a tiered system and why it's important that you talk to your staff about different tiers, because once they see those infractions, if they don't understand that it's ideally 80%, they're going to see this as it doesn't work, and once they see that, they start implementing with less fidelity. And when they implement with less fidelity, the structure starts breaking down in other places over the building. All of a sudden, you have a system that isn't effective overall. You see that in a lot of places. And I'll tell you an example of something that I really saw that was really the opposite of that was when I was visiting Del Valley, Texas, and it was elementary school. And you saw from classroom to classroom, they all had the same structures, the same things to get teachers' attention. They had the same things. Get students' attention, and the same things across the board. The students knew the lingo, they knew the verbiage, they knew the things they needed to know everywhere they go across the building. So the system held up across the building, and you can think about if they took an infraction, any kind of discipline event, and said, "Oh, well, this doesn't work," and then they stopped using those structures, it would have a negative, kind of the opposite of the positive school culture flywheel we're talking about. It could potentially, be a situation where the structure breaks down overall. So that's what we're trying to prevent, and why we talk about PBIS in tiers, and understand that those main structures at the top, those are the things that if you do school-wide should address all issues up to 80%. And once again, that's not 80%, obviously is not all, but only having that 20% of issues dealt with by your support staff, your admin team, that gives them a chance to adequately give those students the time they need and provide the structures that they need to make effective progress with those kiddos. So that is PBIS Tiers, and hope you guys have liked the new format. Hope you guys will listen next week. And if you are invested in this kind of content, I encourage you guys to check us out on TikTok at Why Live School, Instagram at Get Live School, and on YouTube. Once again, that is also Why Live School. Have a great day. We'll see you next week.
The Flywheel Effect, harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.